get started. We're thank you for joining us on your lunch hour, and we're gonna show you some of the results from last year's Heat Watch program. I know some of you are familiar a little bit with the program, and some of you have maybe volunteered with us on this. So we're excited to share our results. I'm Rachel Calabro. I'm from the Rhode Island Department of Health's Climate Change Program. We have Molly Henry from American Forests. We have Lou Allard from Rhode Island DEM. We have Caroline Hoffman from RIDOH as well. And we will be switching off. I'll be running the slides, and we'll have a little bit of discussion. Introduce the team. We're going to talk a little bit about extreme heat in Rhode Island, and then a little bit about who Kappa Heat Watch is, what the program was that we were a part of. We're going to talk a little bit about the findings and show some of the maps that we created. Molly will talk a little bit about tree equity and the tree equity work that we've been doing in Rhode Island, and what American Forests is doing in general, how we're going to be using some of the data, how you can use the data, and then we'll have time for discussion at the end and some ideas about ways we can continue this work. So if you have things that come up during our talk, if you want to put them in the chat, if you have questions, we can start that way, and then at the end we will do a little bit of a hand raise time if you have direct questions for us as well. So we'll try to be watching the chat and hopefully answer your questions. So I'll start just with a little bit of background on extreme heat in Rhode Island. Right now, we look at days above 90 degrees, and right now we're averaging around 10 to 14 days per summer. Some years it's closer to 20, some years it's less than 10. But projected over the next few decades, we're looking at up to 40 days a year of days above 90. We've already warmed 3 degrees, which is higher than the national average, which Rhode Island is actually one of the fastest warming states due to our small size and location near the Atlantic Ocean. We're just warming very fast. And in New England, most of us do not have central air conditioning in our homes. We rely on window units or other ways to cool ourselves. A lot of vulnerable populations don't have access to air conditioning. It's becoming more and more of an issue in our homes, and more and more of a health safety hazard. So as I mentioned, there's more days every summer. You can see how variable our weather is. So, you know, there's some years where we have 25 days, some years where we only have 3 or 4, but overall average 5 more days a year. And we're also increasing our humid heat days, where this is based on wet bulb temperature, which is a measure of how much our bodies can shed heat through sweating and things like that. So moisture in the air prevents our bodies from cooling. And New England has doubled the number of those types of really humid hot days. And then in terms of when our last 80-degree day of the year is, that's also extending into September and October. So sometimes we may get that 80-degree day still at the beginning of October. And then in terms of the health issues of heat, of course, we have varying degrees of heat illness and leading to potential death and sometimes death can also occur as heart attack or kidney failure and things like that in older adults or people with health conditions. So it doesn't always, heat can lead to other health harms. In addition to direct heat exposure, which often happens with athletes, outdoor workers, folks who have compromised health. And then in terms of emergency department visits, the research is showing us that while we issue heat alerts at 90 degrees, or when there's a heat wave would be 3 days of temperatures above 90, when we're seeing people go to the emergency room is closer to 80 degrees. So if there are multiple days in a row of 80 plus temperatures, you can see the graph there, the number of ED visits spikes up quite a lot. And if you're including 80-degree days in those numbers of days per year, we're closer to 70 or 80 days a year that are above 80. So quite a lot of the summertime now is in these heat danger days. And we're concerned here at the Rhode Island Department of Health about health equity and how we can measure social determinants of health and vulnerability and equity in different policies and transportation and hazards and things like that. And so we have 15 measures that we're looking at. And within our natural environment measure, we are including tree canopy cover as an equity measure, because we know there are links with tree canopy and heat health, but also other social determinants of health are affected by tree cover and shade and things like that. And one of the things that we've looked at here in Rhode Island is Providence, the historic redlining maps. And so if you correlate tree canopy with redlining, they line up with the more trees in the more green and blue areas of this redlining map. So if you recall, redlining was a way to assign grades to neighborhoods for mortgages and federal backed loans and things like that. And so if the neighborhood lacked trees, if the neighborhood had industrial development in it, it had a lower grade. And so trees affected the grade, but over time, since the 1940s, these inequities have continued. And so we still see it in tree canopy. And we can see a lot of that extending into today. And so this is one of the things we need to actively work against, is the legacy of some of the decisions that were made in the 1940s and 50s and 60s. So what we did was we joined up with Kappa Heat Watch, which is a project out of the University of Portland, and it's funded by NOAA and NIHIS, which is the National Integrated Heat Health Information System. They have funded these projects across the country. Boston, New York, Worcester has done it. This year, the Mystic River is doing it up in Boston. And so one of the first areas was Virginia, with the Virginia Science Center or Science Museum in Richmond, Virginia. So that was one of the earliest places where this happened. And it's created by Vivek Chandas, who is a professor in Portland, and he has really raised the spotlight on the redlining issue, and specifically on racist housing policies, and how all across the country, we see this correlation with racist housing policy and heat and lack of tree canopy. And he has gotten a lot of press this summer due to the extreme heat on the West Coast and especially in Portland, Oregon. And he goes around with his heat cameras, talks to reporters and shows exactly on the ground, you know, the inequities in heat. And so he worked with researchers in Virginia to look at historically redlined neighborhoods across the country. And their study found that in cities across the country, this heat difference shows up. And so it could be above 12. Portland, Oregon was actually one of the worst. It was around 12 degrees. Ours is really, Providence is probably between 8 and 10 degrees. So similar to other large cities in the country. So what we did was we had these wands that you see here on the car that measure ambient air temperature. So it's temperature, 6 feet off the ground with humidity, and you drive a specific route. The volunteers were given routes to drive. So they picked their neighborhoods, and the wands measured specifically the temperatures along the route. And so you get this route map. And then when all of that data gets sent back to the university, they plug it into their models, and they get these heat map models. So that's where we can fill in based on land use and some other metrics. We fill in between those routes. So we had a lot of fun with our volunteers. They got up early. They did a 6 a.m. route. So starting at 6 a.m. all the way to midnight. Some folks did more than one. Some folks did a couple of routes here and there. We did a lot of social media. We had some really good tweets, a hashtag, and some nice media coverage on Channel 12, and some of our volunteers were interviewed and things like that. So it was in July during a heat wave. So we managed to get a heat wave. We were waiting and hoping that day would be above 90, which it was. And so when we got the 6 a.m., you can see where there were parts of the city. So this is Providence, Pawtucket, Central Falls, and East Providence was our core area for our routes. You can see that it was, the highest temperature was 76 degrees already at 6 a.m. on that morning. And so by the afternoon, it went up to 94 degrees was the highest temperature that we saw. And you can kind of see from these two maps where the heating occurred, like which parts of the city the heating occurred, and how relatively East Providence, the Bay, parts where there's an afternoon sea breeze or parts along the water heated up less than some of the inner core parts of the cities. And up on the Blackstone River in Pawtucket, there's a lot of development right along the Blackstone River. So a lot of daytime heating up there as well. And then what we did was we went out to Narragansett and to Burrillville and had folks drive a few routes there to compare the afternoon temperature, just to see, and we saw temperatures down in the 70s down in Narragansett. So it was almost 20-degree difference in heat there. So looking a little bit closer, you can kind of zoom in on some of the areas where the most extreme heat was. And this one shows Olneyville Square in contrast to Merino Park and Riverside Park, where there's a lot more trees. The river is right there. It's an urban park, and the difference in temperature just within a few blocks was very striking in this case. And then also, if you look at Pawtucket again, along the Blackstone River where the apex is, in this case, Main Street, again, a lot of pavement, a lot of flat roofs. And if you compare that to Oak Hill and along Blackstone Boulevard in Providence, then you can obviously see that contrast as well. And so the distances between these are very small, blocks, half a mile, but the temperature differences definitely show up. And then, so we got the data from the researchers. They sent us all the Excel files and all the maps. And so we have available for folks an ArcGIS online mapping portal that you can use to explore the data. And then you can also download the data. And so Caroline, who was our graduate student at the time, downloaded the data and did a little bit of work for one of her classes, and she's going to tell you about this slide.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. So I was really fortunate to be able to work with the team as a summer scholar, and as Rachel mentioned, to be able to actually use the data for one of my classes. And I was really interested in exploring the spatial relationship between the percent tree canopy and the average afternoon heat index. And I think you can see it pretty clearly on these side-by-side maps here. So on the left, you have the percent tree canopy, and even along the river, you can see areas with higher trees that are darker green show cooler temperatures in that lighter yellow, and the dark purple correlates pretty well to areas where there are not trees that are represented in white on the left. And I actually did a little bit of exploratory statistical analysis that showed that on average, a 1% increase in tree canopy in these areas was associated with a lower ambient heat index in the afternoon of about 0.16 degrees Fahrenheit. And while that's a pretty small number, it was statistically significant. And I think it really shows that when we work to increase the tree canopy over multiple percentages, you can actually have a pretty meaningful change in the average afternoon heat index. And I think that there's a lot more that can be explored in these data.
Yeah, great. We're very interested in furthering our knowledge of what trees are doing, what services they bring. And so I think this is a good area to continue looking at. So as Caroline mentions, we're concerned about the amount of heating between morning and afternoon because there's a lot of inequities in that. But we're also concerned about evening, and we were also concerned about overnight heating and cooling. So because Rhode Island is small, our area was small, we decided that we could add a midnight. So most groups in larger cities have not added a midnight. But we added that so that we could see what was happening overnight. And the areas on the midnight map on the right-hand side, you can see the red areas were still 76 degrees at midnight. And so that is a danger zone for us in terms of health, in terms of, especially for older folks who are stuck in their apartments, who may not be able to cool their apartments efficiently at night. If you have multiple days in a row of temperatures over 70 degrees, that's when our bodies really start to feel the effects because we don't have the recovery time. And then you can also see how the areas around Narragansett Bay or the Providence River kind of stayed stayed warm at night. They didn't, that the bay tends to suck in the heat and sort of keep those areas warm. That's kind of what we found. And when we looked at the overnight cooling, we found that in terms of which areas of the cooled cooled off the most, it was mostly areas that heated up the most, which makes sense, but also areas around the bay and along the rivers and things did not cool down as much. They retained that heat overnight. And so a lot of that has to do with land use in terms of tree canopy, trees transpiring and cooling the ground or the air around them. And so as you get towards the western part of the city, you're getting more trees or more cooler breezes, more transpiration, things like that. So it's really a microclimate thing. And that's why we're thinking that you can actually with land use changes, you can actually do something about, especially about overnight cooling. And then this image shows which areas heated up more than 18 degrees between 6 a.m. and 3 p.m. And so these areas heated up the most, whereas these areas cooled down the most, and they're sort of similar. Another thing to explore, micro topographies, which neighborhoods like that. So with that, please to the chat, and we're gonna switch now to talk a little bit about tree equity and how all of this work sort of fits together. And so I'll send it over to Molly.
Thanks, Rachel, and thank you, Caroline. Again, my name is Molly Henry. I am the Senior Manager of Climate and Health at American Forest. We're a national nonprofit based in DC, but I'm based right here in Rhode Island. And we work in both natural forested landscapes and also urban forests, and doing everything from wildfires in the West and tackling policy on the Hill. But I work within our urban forestry department. And a big piece of it has been our tree equity initiative, which actually has been in the news quite a bit lately, and is very much a part of the solution to our disparity in heat that Rachel and Caroline have laid out pretty well. About 2 years ago, a little bit more than that, we started working with the state of Rhode Island and many of the local stakeholders here in Rhode Island to develop a pilot program which resulted in development of the tree equity score. And this is actually now a national measure of whether or not a neighborhood has achieved tree equity or not. But we developed that methodology right here in Rhode Island, thanks to our stakeholders and partnerships. And as part of that, we actually developed a deep dive tool that nobody else in the nation has. So it's a really great asset to have here in Rhode Island to assess the very issues that we've outlined so far. But the tree equity score really is a standardized way of measuring how well a neighborhood or a city is ensuring that the benefits of trees is reaching all people in the city and every single neighborhood. And we created the tree equity score to kind of address these inequities, and also as a way to mitigate climate change, because we understand that urban forests are one of the few that kind of sit at that nexus of climate change adaptation and mitigation. So unlocking the potential for that as well. Rachel, next slide, please. So just a little bit about the methodology. We actually have on treeequityscore.org, you can look up more information on this, but we have a methodology here which includes the need, assessing needs, so setting a goal. So it's looking at the existing tree canopy. We did collect we purchased data, which is 2018 LIDAR data. So it's high resolution data looking at our current tree canopy cover. And somebody asked about data as well in the chat. So I just want to address that. At some point, we will upload that canopy data to RIDOH too. That is in process. So it should be accessible to everybody. And then we factor in population density. So in creating that goal for where the target should be for a specific neighborhood, factoring in the fact that, a denser neighborhood is not necessarily going to have that much potential for trees. And so lowering the expectations, but making it ambitious at the same time. So that's basically assessing the need or creating a goal. And then we combine that with what we call a priority index, which is these 6 equally weighted characteristics. So it's income, employment, surface temperature. So noting the difference, it's not air temperature, race, age, and health. And a little bit about surface temperature. So Rachel mentioned that we did go out to other parts of the state to kind of assess, how we could collect data beyond the study area. And we're actually using that data. We received a grant working with Vivek and his team to do a statewide analysis. So we'll actually have data, ambient air temperature and humidity data for the entire state as a result of that grant. And we would at that point like to include the ambient air temperature into the mix at some point. So I just want to point out that surface temperature is not the same as ambient air temperature. Ambient air temperature is a much more accurate assessment of how, the health implications of urban heat. At the same time, surface temperature does tell us a lot. It tells us, also where trees are, where sun is being blocked, where trees are transpiring. It also gives us a sense of, the heat radiating up and also influencing the air temperature. So just want to kind of make that distinction. Rachel, next slide, please. So this is just a look at what the tree equity score looks like. And you can actually explore this on a tool that I'll be talking about shortly. But essentially, the lower the score, so we calculated between 0 and 100, the lower the score, the higher the need. So you can look at this kind of the different colors that you see, with orange being kind of the higher priority areas where investment is needed greatest, and a great way to look at when you do have resources or budgeting, where you can and should be prioritizing interventions for tree plantings. And to the next one, please. So I have a series of these for all of our study areas, but I'm just going to start with this one and explain it, and then we'll kind of look and see what the trend looks like throughout the study area. This is taken from a national tool we have. It's called the Tree Equity Score National Explorer, and you can create a municipal report within it, which gives you these really interesting assessments of your everything from your canopy relationship to average temperature, again, surface temperature, to looking at the relationship between tree canopy and people of color, people in poverty, and looking at what that distribution looks like in your city. So for instance, in the city of Rhode Island, we see that there's many neighborhoods here that have fairly high tree equity scores. If you're looking at the graph over to the left, but there are definite inequities present. So you see over to the left, scores of 0 to 63 that really need to be prioritized. And there's also still many that are in the 90 to 100 range as well. So looking at, where the highest priority should be, that orange zone is really where we need to focus. So if you look over to the right, then this is an interesting graph, which kind of looks at how the tree canopy in the city does relate to the average surface temperature in the city. So what we see here is that essentially we have 40 block groups, and block groups are kind of how we look at it's synonymous with the neighborhood that have the lowest tree equity score. So over to the right where the orange is. And they are actually seeing 7.8% less tree canopy than the rest of the city. So on the citywide average, and they're in the 80 to 100th percentile for surface temperature. And so what that means is that there is a clear correlation between tree canopy and surface temperature. And so if we just go through quickly and look at each of the other municipalities in our study area, Rachel.
Yeah, I'm trying, sorry. It's not
all right. Again, little differences here. Pawtucket has less distribution, has less neighborhoods with tree equity scores of 100, more in the 0 to 63 range, so a little bit different than Providence. And also a much clearer trend downward, looking at average temperature and where the increases in temperature percentile falls. So that's Central Falls. Same thing here, a little bit different. Lots of neighborhoods that are in the lower tree equity score range, and many actually in the 64 to 79 range. And then we also see a large percent kind of having very high tree canopy and low percentile in temperature, but also the trend kind of continuing downward. And then same thing, interesting to note with East Providence, I think that they had the highest difference in I think it was the highest difference in the tree canopy and the most neighborhoods that fell into the average temperature percentile in the 80 to 100% range. So that was an interesting one. They were actually 11.5% less tree canopy. And that was 9 block groups that fell into that range. So just something to consider. And then to the next slide, please, Rachel. So I mentioned we have this deep dive tool and that Rhode Island is the only one at this point that actually has this. And it's part of the pilot program that we worked on, funded by the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation. And it is called the Tree Equity Score Analyzer, or TESSA. So maybe some of you on this call have explored it. That's the link down below. But it is a great tool to get all the way down to the parcel level to explore how you can create different planting scenarios. And then it generates a report, which is able to give you the projected impacts, so the ecological and health impacts of your planting program. Great for making the case and for grant writing and leveraging funding opportunities. I know of a number of nonprofits and municipalities that have taken advantage of it and used it to make their case for funding. So just want to point that out. And I think the next slide is just an example of what the tool actually looks like. It's GIS based. You can explore tree equity score, use the filters, look at different indicators that's most important to you. And then it gives you that impact report for making the case. And then I think the last slide here, Rachel, I have is actually the second to last is another great resource, the answer to how. So for tree equity, this is a Rhode Island Tree Equity Funding, Financing, and Policy Guide that was developed by the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. They actually looked specifically at Rhode Island and the current mechanisms that we use to fund planting projects, did a gap analysis, and then made some recommendations on some mechanisms that maybe are less used or could be used to support urban forestry programs, and in particular with the lens towards tree equity. So that's a very long link down at the bottom, but if you go to Vibrant Cities Lab, which is a kind of catch-all for all things related to urban forestry resources and reports, you will be able to access it that way as well. And then the final slide, I believe, is about the capstone project that we're doing with Groundwork Rhode Island and the Pawtucket and Central Falls Health Equity Zone. So they're basically using the Tree Equity Score Analyzer to identify up to 140 tree plantings that they'll be doing in both Central Falls and Pawtucket, and able to put together a planting program using these resources. And the interesting aspect to this project is that the vast majority of the tree plantings are actually on private property. So they're planting where there are renters and homeowners, and giving them, sometimes 1 to 2 trees to help them, cool the areas and reduce their energy bills and get all the many benefits that trees provide. So that'll wrap up this spring. They'll be, as I said, planting 140 trees, and you can see they have the lawn sign. So if you see them around, they're Trees for Us, and they have some tree tags with some interesting information about trees, some educational information. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Lou now to talk a little bit more about this project.
Okay, yes. So just to give a little bit of a brief overview of some of the things that we are doing with over at the Division of Forest Environment for using this heat watch data. So we really, along with several studies, believe that the trees are really the best solution to mitigating these effects of the urban heat island effect. And with that, we can use this heat watch data along with tree equity score analyzer to assist communities both by demonstrating why there's a need for trees and giving them the tools to identify the priority planting areas. So we have this data available for all of our municipal partners. We've made it available for Providence, who's working on their PVD tree plan, their urban forest master plan, and can hopefully be used to inform some of their decisions there. A lot of these hottest areas that we've seen in the maps are also where planting is most challenging. Tree planting is more costly, plantable space is limited. So having a plan in place is really can be crucial. So we have our annual Urban and Community Forestry Grant Program where we offer small grants up to $5,000 for communities or nonprofits to either do tree plantings or even better yet, develop or update ordinances or develop master tree plans, which would include planning for future tree planting, open space management, and so forth. And then occasionally we do have larger grants that come along. So we were fortunate enough to receive a grant from the Forest Service this year for a state urban forest resiliency grant, where we're going to continue working with American Forests and the tree equity score analyzer in Providence with Providence Neighborhood Planning Program and in Newport with the Newport Tree Conservancy. So we'll be doing, excuse me, tree planting programs in the low canopy areas within those areas as well. So exciting stuff. And from here, I will turn it over. I believe we'll have some time for some questions.
Great. Yeah, thanks everyone for helping present. And we're hoping that you all have a chance to explore these tools, check out the maps, look at the Tessa tool, and for graduate students, for high school students, these are really just interesting data sets to take a look at and ask some interesting questions. And so we hope also that folks are ready to go out and plant more trees. So if you have ideas, this is a good time to discuss. I don't know if Molly, if you have stuff. I don't think, if I stop sharing, I will see the chat and then we can, and if you have, if you want to raise your hand, do the hand raise function, we can also call on folks.
While we're waiting for folks to, I guess, gather their thoughts, Rachel, there was a question about the data, and I know that we have that available, and we also have a comprehensive report that Kappa gave us. Is there a way that we can circulate that, or folks can access that information?
Yeah, we have a link to it. There's in the cloud, there's a folder that Kappa gave us that has both the report and the data downloads in it, and a link to the ArcGIS map online. So that's, I believe it's on our webpage, and we can share that on the Climate Change RI webpage. We can provide that. With ECRI, it's, I mean, with Esri, it's a little bit challenging to share links, but it's definitely available for download.
I know Liz is on the call, so maybe we can talk to her about getting it on the climate change website. And we do have a question.
I just posted the link there on the chat.
Great. Thank you for doing that. And And we do have a question about the tree giveaways. So asking, when you give away trees, do people have to drive somewhere to pick them up, or are they delivered? Even if they are delivered, do you move the location around where people can check out the trees? Thinking about people without cars or people with sedans. So I think, Lou, you could address that in the context of the free tree giveaway, but I'm not sure, Matthew, if that was specific to that program or another program. Whatever program. Okay, so looking overall at our programs and accessibility, and that is a really great question. Lou, do you want to address that first?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So we have our energy saving trees program that we offer every spring and fall. And with that, we have 1,000 trees available. And we split that up at pickup locations, 4 per season. We try to rotate those so that every place has at least a somewhat close way to get there. And you know, I try to be flexible. If somebody needs assistance, I try to be as accommodating as I can. But yeah, we just try to keep it so everyone has a shortish drive.
I know we have Cassie too on the call who runs the Providence Neighborhood Planting Program. I don't want to put you on the spot, Cassie, but maybe you can talk about your program if you're comfortable and how you try to make the trees more accessible.
Yeah, our model is specifically for planting street trees in Providence, but we work very closely with residents and community groups. So if somebody wants a street tree in front of their house, they identify a few other residents or neighbor, or in front of their school or their business or their church or other spot. We work with them to identify a few other adjacent or nearby neighbors who also want trees, and then they all sign up to help plant on a community planting day and to help water and steward the trees while they're young if they can, although we also, that's a barrier for a lot of reasons in some neighborhoods. So we work on other kind of community stewardship models. And then we do all the site prep work with the city of Providence and excavate the pits and provide the trees on planting day. So the trees are delivered right to the door or to the street in front of their door. And we prioritize planting in low canopy neighborhoods, and these same neighborhoods that Rachel was pointing out with the high heat index and the low tree canopy. That's where we're focused. But we do a lot of outreach to recruit folks in those neighborhoods to get interested in participating.
Thank you, Cassie. And I can also, sorry, was somebody chiming in? Thought I heard a voice. I can also just speak to the capstone project with Groundwork Rhode Island, and that's also funded partially by DOH and a few others as well. But they actually are doing requests. They're still doing it for this coming fall for trees, and they're actually delivering trees. They're bringing the trees. They're bringing their landscaping crew, and they're doing it with the homeowner or the tenant, and it's a full service process. And so that's another way that they're making it super accessible. And does anybody else want to chime in? I know there's some other folks on the call that do some community tree planting, if you feel comfortable weighing in on this as well, because I think it is an important question about accessibility. And we can give you a minute too, because there was another comment in here that I thought maybe we could address as well. Wayne asked, he made a comment, I would suggest that the canopy cover goal be modified to current canopy cover or a little more where the current cover exceeds the 48% goal. Thank you. I actually had a question about where the canopy cover goal was coming from. Was that in relation to the tree equity score and that assessment for need? I don't know if Wayne can chime in on that. No, no, okay. I can just give a little bit more explanation just to the target that we create for the tree equity score. So we do use 3 different ecoregions in the nation. So looking at historically forested areas, grasslands, and desert. And we have a baseline target for those 3 different ecoregions. And so for Rhode Island, being in a historically forested area, it's at 40%. So that's where they kind of start. And then the population density kind of adjusts that, as well as looking at the current tree canopy cover and the gap in relation to other neighborhoods in the city. So it gets a little bit complex to explain the methodology a little bit. We try to make it simple and as accessible as possible, but I invite you, if you do have more technical questions about it, to go to the treeequityscore.org website where there's a great explanation on the methodology, and you can actually download the tree equity score data directly. We have it by state, and for Rhode Island, you can download it and add it as a layer to your existing GIS work. But of course, we also have the interactive analyzer map. So, any other questions or comments?
I guess just elaborating on my last one, Rachel mentioned looking for ideas, which maybe this is not, you're actually not looking for ideas, you just want to answer questions, but my idea around that, the thing for at least the first program though, is just having volunteers with like trucks driving trees to people, and even just driving around and finding people that want trees in their yard. And I'd be happy to volunteer for that. I don't know, try, but yeah.
Yeah, we need a youth core of ambassadors, tree ambassadors. So I know Cassie has a lot of volunteers who are tree experts and tree converts. So, and we do also have the tree steward program, and Cassie, I don't know if you want to talk about the stewardship opportunities, but the Rhode Island Tree Council also does tree stewardship workshops, and we're trying to increase capacity in terms of workforce and things like that for maintenance of trees, because you can't just go and plant these trees and without some care taken to them and maintenance and things like that.
It sounds like there is some synergy too. Cassie wants to talk to you, Matthew, about your great idea.
Lou and Matthew, and we should talk and plan a PVD tree drop off with volunteer delivery. I love that idea. Yeah, there's a lot of, I think many of the folks, like I know, Newport Tree Conservancy and Groundwork and PNPP and others are very focused on, we all sort of have different stewardship and tree, how to keep the trees alive once we get them planted. That's a key part of this. But I had a question also that I don't know if, I love trees, obviously. I'm pro trees addressing heat. But has there been either in other cities or thinking about here, looking at some of the other heat mitigating things in relation to these metrics and mapping, like white roofs or some of the other, in addition to, well, we're also doing all the tree canopy stuff. Are there other things that you've looked at or other places you've thought about in relation to this?
Yeah, New York City has done a lot of work on white roofs, and they do have a program where apartment buildings can apply to get the roof painted white, and surfaces as well. So not repaving parking lots with black tar, and ensuring that there's light colored pavements and cement, concrete, that is reflective of heat. So there's a lot of work being done about that too, and cool surfaces and other cooling techniques, and also in terms of misting stations at schools, and we've funded a few of those. And when there's an actual, heat emergency or a heat event, there are certainly ways that we can start becoming more adaptive in Rhode Island, looking at places like in Arizona and southern state, other areas that have been dealing with this, sunshades and bus stops that are covered, and for students walking to school, and for folks taking public transportation, and folks who need to buy their groceries and walk home with them. These are all little issues that just make those chores even worse in the heat. And so any way that we can protect people doing outdoor activities.
There's a couple other questions in the chat that I wanted to bring up. So the other Molly asked, are there existing resources for teachers who might want to use these data sets for their classes at the high school level? Rachel, I think you've given a little bit of thought to this, so maybe you can address that question.
Yeah, if you want to use the online mapping portal, the mapping tool, that would be an easy one for students to explore, and you could easily create a short lesson plan based on that. I also am trying to order some thermal cameras, the way I showed that picture of Vivek with his on his cell phone. You can purchase a little attachment to your iPhone, that a camera attachment that will do infrared, but I'm trying to purchase a few handheld ones that I can lend out to teachers. And so a really good activity is to use those infrared devices, go around the schoolyard, point it at different surfaces, look and see how hot certain surfaces are based on the color that they are, whether they're in the shade or in the sun. So you can tailor this really for different grade levels. And if you're interested, I would love to, partner on trying to create some lesson plans around this. And I might end up just doing that and posting some lesson ideas for teachers.
Yeah, Rachel and I gave a presentation to some high schoolers as well a few weeks ago, and we also had them kind of look around at the analyzer, where they live, where they go to school. So that's like another way to kind of interact. You can also look and turn off and on different layers, and so that could be another tool. And there's one, I think we have time for one more question. I see that Carlos asked about the tree equity score, saying that we mentioned the tree equity score can be downloaded. Is that something within the analyzer? Yes, so the tree equity score is kind of built into the analyzer, but again, I mentioned you can turn on and off different filters, so different priorities you can turn on or off. The tree equity score that you can download is basically like a static layer that you can put onto your GIS map and whatever other project you're working on. So the one that you can download from our website is a little bit different. We're lucky that we already have this interface to allow you to kind of interact with it a little bit more, but understanding some folks already have projects going and they want to kind of lay this on top and understand the dynamics there. Yeah, so I think any final comments or questions from anyone? I guess we have one more minute.
Thank you all for tuning in and spending time with us, and we'll be sharing the recording link and I'll put it in our newsletter and send it out to folks who registered, in case I know some folks registered and couldn't attend. So look forward to that.
All right. Well, thank you all for
Okay.
joining. Yeah, really appreciate it. And I don't think we put our contact information. I will put my email in the chat. There you have it. And of course, I made a typo.
And yeah, you
There
can
we
find our contact on the climate change webpage at RIDOH. So thank you all.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.